A Mustang took a farmer to an abandoned cabin. What he found inside was a dark secret. Mark Reynolds had seen his fair share of strange things living on a farm, but nothing could have prepared him for the black stallion that appeared one cold autumn morning. The horse, wild-eyed and frenzied, galloped into his fields with a purpose. Its eyes locked onto Mark as though it knew exactly who was meant for. What happened next, though, would lead him into the woods and to a forgotten cabin where a dark secret lay buried for decades. But no one could have prepared him for the terrifying truth that lay inside. You won't believe what happens next. Make sure to subscribe for more stories that will haunt you long after you hear them. Mark Reynolds had never been a superstitious man. Life on the farm was simple, working the land, tending to the animals, and harvesting in the fall. He had grown used to the quiet solitude his farm offered, but everything changed the day the Mustang appeared. The black stallion emerged out of nowhere, galloping across Mark's fields like a shadow. Its coat was as dark as midnight, and its eyes, wild and frantic, seemed to burn with a strange intensity. The horse's gaze locked onto Mark, as if it knew exactly who it was meant to find. But what happened next would lead him deep into the woods, to a forgotten cabin, where a secret long buried would reveal itself in the most unexpected way. Mark, stunned and uncertain, stood frozen, unsure of what to do. He'd seen wild horses before, but nothing like this. This one wasn't just an animal. It was as if it carried a message, an urgency in its very being. Without warning, the Mustang turned and began walking toward the forest, its steps sure and deliberate, like it was guiding Mark to something he couldn't yet understand. Curiosity soon overcame his hesitation. Mark followed, unsure of where this path would lead, but unable to shake the feeling that it was important. As they ventured deeper into the woods, Mark saw a silhouette in the distance, an old, weather-beaten cabin hidden away in the trees. The cabin looked ancient, its walls overgrown with ivy and moss, the roof sagging under years of neglect. It seemed forgotten by time itself. Mark didn't recognize it. It wasn't part of the land he'd grown up with. There was something unsettling about the place, something he couldn't quite put into words. But the Mustang had brought him here, and there was no turning back now. The horse stopped in front of the cabin, its body still, as if it had fulfilled its purpose. Mark couldn't explain it, but he felt as though the horse was waiting for him to open the door, to step inside. A cold chill ran down his spine, but the pull of curiosity was stronger than any fear. He approached the door slowly. His hand hovered over the rusted handle. With a deep breath, Mark pushed the door open. The sound of the hinges creaked loudly in the otherwise silent forest. Inside was pitch dark, thick with the scent of dust and decay. There was an oppressive stillness in the air, but as his eyes adjusted, Mark could just make out the outline of old furniture and forgotten relics. Then he saw it, something that made his blood run cold. There, tucked away in the far corner, was a chest. It wasn't big, but it had a presence, a weight to it that Mark couldn't ignore. And on top of the chest, a faded photograph lay, its edges curling. Something about the photograph unsettled him. He moved toward it, his heart pounding in his chest. The Mustang stood outside the door, watching. Mark could feel the weight of the horse's gaze on him. He knew that whatever secret this cabin held was about to be uncovered, and that knowledge both terrified and intrigued him. Mark stood motionless for a moment, the photograph in his hand like a lead weight, dragging him deeper into confusion. He turned it over, expecting to find nothing more than an old family picture, something insignificant. But instead, the back of the photo was covered in scrawled handwriting, faded, almost illegible, but still visible enough to make out a few words. The key is hidden under the floorboards. His pulse quickened as the coldness in his chest deepened. What did it mean? What key? And what floorboards was it referring to? His mind raced, but the more he thought, the more questions piled up, none of them with answers. For a moment he stood still, the only sound the wind howling through the cracks in the cabin's walls. The air felt heavy, pressing in on him. Mark turned his attention back to the chest in the corner. It was made of dark wood, ancient and weathered, like the cabin itself. Something about it seemed different, as if it held something more than just forgotten trinkets. He slowly made his way across the room, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He felt like a trespasser, like he wasn't supposed to be there, but something had drawn him in. The Mustang had led him here, as though fate itself had brought him to this place. A sense of urgency pushed him forward. When he reached the chest, he knelt down and ran his fingers over its surface. The wood was smooth but worn. As he touched the lid, a sudden chill washed over him and his breath hitched. He felt the unmistakable presence of something watching him, something waiting. It was as if the very air around him had thickened, closing in, but he ignored it. His hand shook as he unlatched the chest. The lid creaked open slowly, the smell of mildew and old leather filling his nostrils. Inside, there was a small stack of old books, faded and brittle. At first, he thought that was all there was, but something caught his eye. Beneath the books, hidden in the very bottom of the chest, was a thin metal box. Mark pulled it out carefully, inspecting it. It was cold to the touch, with an intricate lock but no keyhole. The metal was old, tarnished, and etched with strange symbols he didn't recognize. It felt oddly familiar, like he had seen it somewhere before. But where? He turned it over in his hands, inspecting every inch. The symbols seemed to almost glow faintly under the dim light coming through the cracked windows. Mark knew there was something important about this box. He had to find out what it was. Without a second thought, he pocketed the box. He needed to see if there was anything else in the cabin, any other clues that might explain what the hell was going on. Mark moved to the corner of the room where the photograph had been found. He bent down and began inspecting the floorboards, his fingers running along the edges of each one, looking for any sign of a hidden compartment or anything that might resemble a key. As his hand slid along the floor, he felt a subtle shift in the wood beneath his touch. There it was. His heart raced as he pried at the floorboard, and after a few moments it loosened. He carefully lifted it, revealing a small cavity beneath. The air in the cabin seemed to grow even colder, a chill creeping up his spine. Inside the cavity lay a small iron key, its surface scratched and worn, as though it had been buried there for centuries. Mark's hand trembled as he picked up the key. The weight of it in his palm felt significant, like it was meant for something specific, something that had been waiting for him all these years. He knew that this key, along with the box he had found, were pieces of a puzzle that he was only beginning to understand. He stood up, the floorboard clicking back into place as he moved toward the door. The Mustang, still standing outside, seemed to be watching him, its dark eyes filled with an intensity that Mark couldn't quite place. He stepped outside, clutching the key in the box. The fresh air hit him like a wave, clearing his head, but there was no relief. The sense of foreboding still lingered in the pit of his stomach. Mark stood outside the cabin for a moment, breathing in the cold air. He looked back at the Mustang, who was now standing motionless by the edge of the forest. The horse had done its part. It had brought him here, led him to the truth. But what did it all mean? He felt like he was standing on the edge of something much larger than he could comprehend. What was the secret hidden here? What was the connection between the photograph, the key, and the box? And why had the Mustang led him to this exact spot? Mark had to know. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. He glanced down at the key in his hand, feeling its weight, and then at the box tucked safely in his coat pocket. The answers were close. He could feel it. But the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like the answers could break everything apart. The Mustang shifted and turned, slowly walking toward the tree line as if it was ready to leave. Mark hesitated, then followed. He didn't know what he was looking for yet, but he felt certain that whatever lay ahead would reveal the truth about the cabin, the key, and the long hidden secret. Mark followed the Mustang through the trees, its steady pace unwavering as it led him further into the woods. The thick canopy of branches above them seemed to trap the daylight, casting long, eerie shadows that slithered across the ground. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth, the crunch of leaves underfoot, and the sound of his own ragged breathing. The silence was almost too oppressive, like the forest itself was holding its breath. He clutched a small iron key in his pocket, his mind racing with possibilities. What could it unlock? What was so important that it had been hidden in that cabin, buried beneath the floorboards for so many years? Mark couldn't help but feel like a part of something much larger than he could ever understand. He wasn't sure what he had gotten himself into, but it was clear now that he couldn't turn back. The Mustang had chosen him for a reason. They walked for what felt like hours, with the horse guiding him through a winding path that Mark had never noticed before. He had lived on this land for years that had seen every inch of the forest. But there was something about this place, something that felt wrong. The trees grew closer together, their trunks twisted and gnarled like ancient sentinels watching over the land. Mark felt like he was moving deeper into a forgotten world, one that hadn't seen human eyes in a long time. As they reached a small clearing, the Mustang came to a halt. Mark stopped too, his breath visible in the cold air. The clearing was surrounded by tall trees, their twisted branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. In the center of the clearing stood a stone well, its surface weathered and cracked with age. The well seemed completely out of place, sitting in the middle of this otherwise untouched wilderness. Mark felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at the well. Something about it felt wrong. He could sense a dark energy emanating from it, something that he couldn't quite explain, but that made his skin crawl. The horse was standing motionless, its eyes fixed on the well. Mark instinctively reached for the key in his pocket, his hand tightening around it. He had no idea why, but he felt like this was the place. This was the next step in unraveling the mystery. He approached the well cautiously, each step measured as though the ground itself might betray him. The stones that lined the edge of the well were worn and slick with moisture, the symbols on them faint but discernible. As Mark crouched down to get a closer look, he noticed something peculiar, an engraving near the base of the well, a symbol that matched the one on the metal box he had found in the cabin. It was the same intricate design, the same faint glow, like it was alive with a strange energy. His heart began to race. Was this the key to the mystery? Was this what he had been looking for all along? He glanced back at the Mustang, still standing a few paces away, its dark eyes watching him intently. The horse made no sound, but there was something in its gaze that made Mark feel like the animal knew something he didn't, as if the Mustang was urging him forward, pushing him toward the answers that were so close, yet so far. Mark hesitated for a moment, then pulled the small metal box from his coat pocket. He felt its weight in his hands, the strange symbols on its surface glowing ever so faintly in the dim light. He ran his fingers over the lock, searching for a way to open it. There had to be something, some hidden mechanism that would unlock the secrets inside. He pressed on various parts of the box, hoping for a click, a shift, anything. But nothing happened. Frustration bubbled up inside him. What was he missing? The key had to be here somewhere, but he couldn't see it. The box wouldn't open, and the well seemed to be taunting him, its depths a silent reminder of the mystery that still eluded him. He turned back to the Mustang, ready to give up and walk away. But before he could take a single step, a voice, clear, calm, and unmistakably human, spoke from the trees behind him. "You're looking for something, aren't you?" Mark spun around, his heart skipping a beat. The voice was soft but firm, like it had always been a part of the forest, an echo of something ancient. Standing at the edge of the clearing, a man emerged from the shadows. He was tall, with a weathered face, his clothes ragged and worn as though he had been living off the land for years. His eyes, however, were sharp, alert, and filled with something that Mark couldn't quite place, knowledge perhaps, or wisdom. But there was also a hint of sadness in his gaze, as though he knew exactly what Mark was searching for. Mark stood frozen, the air thick with tension. He hadn't heard anyone approach, and he certainly hadn't seen anyone in these woods before. Who was this man? How had he gotten here? The stranger stepped forward, his boots crunching on the leaves beneath him. "I've been waiting for you, Mark," he said, his voice steady. "I know what you've found, and I know what it means." Mark's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "How do you know my name?" The man smiled faintly. "I've been watching you for a long time. You're not the first to come looking for answers, but you're the first one to make it this far." Mark swallowed hard, his mind reeling. What is this place? What's going on here? The man's gaze darkened. This place is older than you can imagine. It's a part of something much bigger, something that has been hidden away for centuries. The Mustang, the key, the box, all of it was meant to lead you here. Mark felt his stomach tighten. "But why me?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Why am I the one?" The man's eyes softened, though his expression remained grave. "You were chosen because you have the courage to face what others cannot. The secrets of this place are not meant for everyone. They're not meant for the faint-hearted. But you have a purpose here." Mark's hand shook as he clutched the box tighter. What is that purpose? The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he nodded toward the well, his eyes never leaving Mark. You're the key to unlocking what's buried beneath. But be warned, Mark, what you uncover here will change everything. There's no going back once you've learned the truth. Mark took a deep breath, the weight of the man's words sinking in. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Whatever secrets lay buried in the well, whatever the box held, it was time to face the truth. Mark stood motionless as the stranger's words echoed in his mind. The gravity of the situation, the weight of what he was about to face, pressed heavily on his chest. It felt like 1,000 unseen eyes were watching him from every corner of the forest, waiting for him to make the next move. But what choice did he have? The Mustang had led him here, the stranger had appeared with knowledge of his search, and the box in his pocket felt heavier with each passing second. The stranger's eyes were unwavering as he nodded toward the well. The well is the gateway, he said softly, his voice tinged with a strange reverence. It has stood here for centuries, guarding the secret that has been buried beneath it. What you find there will answer everything. But be prepared, Mark. Once you open it, there's no turning back. Mark's throat tightened. He had been chasing this mystery for so long, but now that he was standing on the edge of it, he wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead. What kind of secret could be hidden beneath this old well, and why had it been kept so hidden for so long? He looked down at the key in his hand, the small iron object now feeling like the most significant thing in the world. The engraving on the key matched the strange symbols he had seen earlier, the same ones that had appeared on the box he had found in the cabin. He now realized that every clue, every step along the way, had been leading him to this very moment. Is there any other way? Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. He wasn't sure why he asked. Maybe he was hoping for some final reassurance. Maybe he was just afraid. But the stranger simply shook his head, his expression solemn. There's no other way, Mark. You have to face it. With a slow, deliberate movement, Mark took a deep breath and walked toward the well. He could feel the eyes of the Mustang still on him, and though he had never been a superstitious man, a deep sense of destiny seemed to hang over everything. He crouched down in front of the well, the stone cold and rough beneath his fingertips. His heart beat loudly in his ears as he examined the area, searching for any sign of how to unlock the mystery of this ancient structure. He had no idea what he was supposed to do, but the key seemed to call out to him. He could feel it. Every instinct told him that this was it. This was where the answers lay. Mark stood up and, without hesitating, pressed the key into a small depression on the stone. There was a soft click, like the sound of gears shifting in the dark, and then a low rumble filled the air. The ground trembled beneath him, and the well seemed to react, shifting slightly as if coming to life. Mark staggered back, nearly losing his balance as the stone structure began to open before his eyes. Slowly, the stone walls of the well slid apart with a grinding sound, revealing a deep, dark opening. Mark felt his breath catch in his throat. This was it. He had unlocked something that no one had seen in generations, something that had been hidden away for a reason. But he wasn't sure if he was ready for the truth that was waiting below. The chill in the air intensified, and the forest around him seemed to hold its breath. The stranger stepped forward and placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. as though grounding him in the moment. "It's not about what you're ready for," the man said quietly. "It's about what you're willing to face. The truth doesn't care about your readiness. It's been waiting for you." Mark nodded, though his heart was racing. He felt the weight of the decision press on him. If he opened this well, he would expose everything that had been buried, hidden from the world for so long. But what if the truth was too much? What if it shattered everything he knew? But he couldn't stop now. He had come this far. The Mustang had led him here for a reason, and the box in his pocket was the key to understanding what had been hidden away. With a trembling hand, Mark reached into the well and pulled out a rusted metal rope that seemed to hang down from the dark abyss. It was thick and worn, and though it looked fragile, it felt strong enough to hold his weight. He tied it securely to the stone, testing it before he made his descent. The air grew colder as Mark lowered himself into the well. His fingers brushed against the stone walls as he descended, and the darkness seemed to close in around him. The deeper he went, the more the air seemed to change. It was thicker now, as though he was descending into the very bowels of the earth. His feet finally touched solid ground, and he paused, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the total darkness. There was no sound, no movement, only an eerie stillness that seemed to hang in the air. It was as if the well had swallowed him whole, and now he was alone in its depths. Mark fumbled around in the dark, his hands brushing against what felt like wooden planks. He stepped forward carefully, his breath shallow, trying to make sense of what was around him, and then his fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. It was a door. The door was small, almost hidden in the shadows, and covered with a layer of dust and dirt. But there was something about it that felt different, like it had been untouched for centuries. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? Could this be the thing he had been looking for? Without thinking, he reached for the door handle. It was cold, almost icy to the touch, but as his fingers wrapped around it, he could feel the pulse of energy coming from the other side. The secrets of this place, the truth, were waiting just beyond that door. He turned the handle slowly, the door creaking open with an agonizing slowness. The darkness behind it seemed to swallow the light, and for a moment, Mark was paralyzed by the unknown. But something inside of him urged him forward, pulling him through the door and into the heart of the mystery. Mark stepped cautiously through the door, his heart thundering in his chest as the cold air of the chamber wrapped around him like a shroud. The darkness in the room seemed to deepen as he entered, and he felt a strange unease settle into his bones. Every instinct he had told him to turn back, to leave the well, to forget the mystery he had so eagerly pursued. But his legs refused to move. The pull of the unknown was far too strong now. The space beyond the door was vast, its walls lined with shelves stacked with old, forgotten artifacts. Ancient books with cracked leather bindings, pieces of worn pottery, and strange relics Mark couldn't begin to understand filled the room. But what truly caught his attention was the object in the center of the room, a pedestal, towering and imposing, holding a single item. Mark's eyes were drawn to it like a magnet, his mind racing with possibilities. The pedestal was made of stone, its surface etched with symbols that he had seen before, on the box, on the key, even on the well itself. They were ancient, cryptic, but somehow familiar, like they were part of a language he couldn't quite understand, but instinctively knew. As he drew closer, he saw it. It was a book. The book was resting on the pedestal, its pages old and yellowed with age. It was massive, its cover bound in what appeared to be a deep red leather, but there were no markings on it, no title, no author, just a plain, unadorned cover that seemed to hum with an energy of its own. It was almost as if the book had been waiting for him, as if it had always been there for him to find. Mark's hand reached out, trembling, as though the very act of touching it would change everything. He didn't know why, but something inside him urged him to open it. He had no idea what he was about to uncover, but he felt like this was the final step in the journey. He had come too far to stop now. His fingers brushed the cover, and a strange warmth spread through his body, as if the book itself were alive. He hesitated for a moment, the weight of the moment hanging heavily on him. But then, with a deep breath, he opened it. The pages seemed to turn on their own, as though the book were breathing. The letters on the pages appeared to shift before his eyes, the ink flowing like liquid as the words began to form. Mark could hardly keep up, his eyes scanning the text, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was reading. It wasn't just a book. It was a record, a chronicle of events that had transpired long before Mark was even born. As he read, he began to understand. The book told a story of an ancient civilization, one that had lived long before the modern world, a society so advanced, so powerful, that they had unlocked the secrets of life itself. But their discovery came at a cost. A terrible price that shattered their world and buried their knowledge in the deepest corners of the earth. The civilization had discovered the key to immortality, not in the way most people might imagine, but through the manipulation of time and space. They had learned to control the flow of time, to extend their lives beyond what nature intended. But the power they had sought was too great, too dangerous. The fabric of reality itself began to tear, and the earth had to bury their knowledge to prevent the catastrophe from spreading. Mark's hand shook as he turned the page. The book wasn't just a record of the past, it was a warning. The secret they had uncovered, the power they had played with, was far too dangerous to be allowed to exist in the world. That was why the well had been built, why the symbols had been carved into the stone. That was why the box, the key, and the Mustang had all led Mark to this moment. He wasn't just uncovering an ancient secret, he was unlocking a dangerous power, a power that could change everything if it fell into the wrong hands. Mark closed the book with a sudden force, his heart racing. His mind was reeling with what he had just read. He had to stop this. He had to destroy the book, keep the secrets buried where they belonged. But he knew it wouldn't be that simple. The power that had been hidden away for centuries wasn't going to let him leave so easily. The ground beneath his feet rumbled, and Mark stumbled, his hands bracing against the pedestal for support. The room seemed to shift around him, the walls groaning, the air thick with an oppressive weight. It was as if the book had awakened something that should never have been disturbed. The Mustang's form appeared in the doorway, its dark eyes watching him intently. Mark could hear the hooves hitting the ground as the horse stepped into the room, its presence filling the space. But this time, there was something different about it. The Mustang wasn't just a guide anymore. It was part of the ancient force that had been unleashed. It was a protector, a keeper of the secrets that had been buried for so long. Mark looked at the horse, a surge of realization flooding over him. The Mustang hadn't just brought him here, it had been leading him to the truth. The creature was tied to this ancient power, part of the force that had been hidden away for centuries. It was here to ensure that the secret stayed buried. The rumbling grew louder, the walls shaking as the ground beneath Mark's feet cracked open. The book began to glow with a faint, otherworldly light, the symbols on its pages shifting again, as if trying to escape. Mark took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do I do?" he whispered, his voice cracking with fear. He didn't know if he could stop it, didn't know if he could control the power that had been unleashed. The Mustang's eyes locked with his, and Mark saw a flash of understanding in the creature's gaze. It was telling him something, urging him to act. Suddenly, Mark knew. He understood what he had to do. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the iron key. The strange symbols on it seemed to glow in the light from the book, and he felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. He knew this was the key, the final piece of the puzzle. Mark placed the key into a slot on the pedestal, the stone clicking into place. The room trembled violently as the light from the book grew brighter, blinding him. He couldn't pull away, couldn't stop what was happening. The Mustang stepped forward, its presence a constant in the chaos that surrounded Mark. The key turned, and with a final deafening rumble, everything went silent. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark stood frozen, the key still in his hand, his mind racing. The air around him felt charged, as though every molecule of space was vibrating with some unseen force. The book's light had faded, but its presence lingered, its power somehow still alive in the room. His heart thudded in his chest, and the rumbling in the ground seemed to fade, leaving behind a deep, unsettling stillness. For a moment, Mark thought that maybe it was over. Maybe he had done it, unlocked the power, exposed the truth, and put everything back in its place. But as he looked around, he realized the room wasn't the same as it had been moments before. The shelves had shifted, the walls had moved. There was something different about the air, something more oppressive, more alive. The Mustang stood by the doorway, watching him with those haunting, knowing eyes. It was as though the creature had seen this moment before, as though it had known what was about to happen. Its head was held high, but there was a subtle shift in its posture, a readiness to spring into action. It wasn't the same creature Mark had followed into the woods. It had changed too. The air between them was thicker now, charged with the energy of whatever had been unleashed. Mark could feel it too. The power that was rising, shifting, was not something that could be ignored. It was ancient, untamed, and it had found its way to him. He was no longer just a witness to this secret. It had become a part of him. And now, Mark realized he had a choice he hadn't expected. "Is this what I was meant to do?" he muttered under his breath, his voice cracking with uncertainty. The words echoed in the room, bouncing off the stone walls, but no one answered. No one needed to. Mark knew what he had done, and he knew it wasn't over. The book, the key, the Mustang, they had all led him to this place for a reason. But now that the power was awake, he felt a heavy responsibility on his shoulders. He looked down at the key again. The symbols were glowing faintly, almost pulsating with life. It felt like it was calling to him, urging him to do something more, something else. Without thinking, he turned back to the pedestal. The light from the book had faded entirely, but the space around him still seemed to hum, as if the room was waiting for him to make the next move. Mark stepped forward and placed the key back into the pedestal slot. He twisted it again, and this time the reaction was immediate. The ground shook, this time harder, the walls around him groaning and cracking. Mark stumbled, falling to one knee as the tremors intensified. The air itself seemed to tear, the room now vibrating with an energy that was both ancient and raw. The Mustang snorted, its ears flicking back as if disturbed by the growing power that was being unleashed. But it didn't move, didn't retreat. It stayed by the door, as if it knew this was the only way forward. The stone walls of the room split apart, as though some invisible force was pulling them in opposite directions. And then, from the center of the room, a dark, swirling vortex began to form. It started slowly at first, just a faint shimmer in the air, like the flicker of heat on pavement. But as Mark watched in awe, the vortex expanded, twisting and pulling at the very fabric of reality. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, as if the world itself was being sucked into the darkness. Mark staggered backward, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The Mustang's gaze was unwavering, its attention focused on the swirling black mass that was now growing rapidly before them. He could feel the pull, the undeniable force of it. It was as though the vortex was calling to him, drawing him in. But he knew that if he stepped closer, if he gave in, there would be no turning back. There was no telling what would happen if he entered that darkness. No telling what it would do to him or to the world. Mark. The voice was a whisper in the back of his mind. It wasn't the stranger. It wasn't the Mustang. It was something far older. Something that had been waiting in the depths of the well for centuries. Something that had been bound, locked away, and now was free to rise again. The voice came again, this time clearer, more insistent. You've opened the gate. The choice is yours now. Mark's head spun as the weight of the decision pressed down on him. He wasn't ready. He didn't know enough. But the pull was undeniable. The secrets of the ancient civilization, the knowledge buried under centuries of earth, were within his reach. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, and stared into the vortex. The air crackled with energy, and his pulse quickened. He could feel the power, an overwhelming surge of it, and he could feel it calling to him, whispering promises of knowledge, of power, of immortality. Everything he had been seeking was just beyond his grasp, but at what cost? The ground beneath him shuddered again, and Mark felt himself being drawn toward the swirling darkness. It was as though the vortex was reaching out to him, urging him to step forward. His legs felt heavy, as though they were no longer his own. He reached out a hand, trembling, toward the edge of the vortex. But just as he was about to step into the unknown, a loud, commanding voice rang out from the doorway. "Stop!" Mark froze, his hand still outstretched. The voice wasn't the stranger's. It wasn't the Mustang's. It was something different, something that came from deep within the well, from the very heart of the secret that had been locked away for so long. He turned slowly to see the stranger standing in the doorway, his eyes blazing with urgency. "You must choose, Mark. What is it you want? What is worth risking everything for?" Mark's heart pounded. He wasn't sure what he was risking, what the consequences of his choice would be, but the pull of the vortex was overwhelming, and the ancient power seemed to be beckoning him forward. He turned his gaze back to the swirling darkness. What was he supposed to do now? Though with the vortex looms before him, will Mark take the step into the unknown, or will he turn away? The fate of the world hinges on his next move. Keep reading to find out what happens next, and don't forget to subscribe for the thrilling conclusion to this incredible journey. Mark stood at a precipice, torn between the swirling darkness that beckoned him with promises of power and knowledge, and the voice of the stranger, who stood in a doorway with urgency in his eyes. The tension in the room was suffocating, the air thick with the weight of the decision he had to make. The vortex pulsed, its dark energy alive and consuming, pulling at him, urging him to cross the threshold. But the stranger's words echoed in his mind. You must choose. He felt it, the intense pressure of this moment, the significance of what lay before him. Whatever choice he made, whatever path he took, it would alter everything. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the entire world, the knowledge, the power that the ancient civilization had sealed away for centuries. It was all within reach, and with it, the possibility of changing the world as they knew it. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white. His mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. Could he handle the weight of such knowledge? Could he control the power that had been locked away? Or would it consume him as it had consumed those who had come before him? The stranger's voice rang out again, sharper this time. Mark, this isn't just about you. This power, it's dangerous. You don't know what you're unlocking. You don't know what will happen if you give in. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to run, wanted to escape, but the vortex had a hold on him. He couldn't look away. He couldn't turn back. He had always wanted answers, always sought to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. But now that it was within reach, now that the secrets of the past were laid bare before him, he felt the weight of the consequences crashing down on him. Was it worth it? Was the risk of losing himself worth the possibility of gaining something more? The Mustang shifted beside him, its presence steady and silent, but Mark could feel the creature's watchful gaze, its deep, knowing eyes locked onto his every move. There was a certain wisdom in those eyes, a silent understanding that Mark couldn't fully grasp, but he could sense it. The Mustang had been guiding him this whole time, and now it waited. I don't know if I can do this, Mark whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. What if I can't control it? The stranger's voice softened, his expression grave. None of us can control it, Mark. That's the danger, the power in that vortex. It's not meant to be harnessed. It's too much for anyone to hold. It can tear apart everything you know, everything you love. Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. The stranger was right, but something in him still longed for the truth. He had come this far. He had followed the Mustang into the woods, opened the cabin, unlocked the box, and now he was standing on the edge of a precipice that could either save or destroy him. I can't. Mark's voice cracked as the weight of it all settled in. I can't leave this secret buried forever. What if there's a way to use it? What if we could change things? The stranger stepped forward, his face serious. You're not seeing the bigger picture. Power like this doesn't change things for the better. It destroys. It corrupts. It's a cycle that repeats itself. That's why it was sealed away in the first place. Mark shook his head, his thoughts in turmoil. He had always believed that knowledge was the key to progress, that the more they learned, the more they could change the world for the better. But what if the stranger was right? What if uncovering these secrets would only lead to ruin? He wanted to believe there was a way to control it, a way to use the power for good, but deep down, he knew the danger was real. The past civilizations that had tried to harness this force had failed. They had destroyed themselves. Mark took a step back from the vortex, his eyes lingering on the dark swirl of energy. It was as if the world around him had slowed, every decision stretching out into eternity. The key was still in his hand, the book still in the back of his mind. The choices before him were immense, too much for any one person to bear. He turned to the Mustang, meeting its gaze. The horse's eyes seemed to say everything he needed to know. The Mustang had been with him from the beginning, guiding him when he had no answers, pushing him forward when he doubted himself. Now, the creature was waiting for him to make the choice, to decide the fate of this knowledge. Mark swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I can't do it," he whispered. "I can't let this power loose." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The vortex pulsed in response, almost as if it were disappointed, as though it had expected him to give in. But the air began to shift, the oppressive energy of the room lightening just a fraction. The stranger nodded, his face unreadable. "It's not easy, Mark. The hardest part is knowing when to stop. You've done the right thing. The knowledge. It's not meant for us. Not now." Mark took a step away from the vortex, the weight on his shoulders beginning to lift just slightly. He looked at the key in his hand, the ancient symbols glowing faintly once more, but this time it felt different. It felt neutral. The power was still there, but it no longer called to him, no longer tempted him. "I can't let it control me," Mark said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "I have to walk away." The Mustang stepped forward then, its presence calming, a steady reminder that he wasn't alone. Mark walked toward the stone pedestal and placed the key back into the slot. The energy around him flickered for a moment, but then the room grew still. The vortex dissipated slowly, the swirling darkness fading into nothingness. Mark exhaled deeply, the weight of the decision finally sinking in. The power had been contained, for now. But what if the secrets were never meant to stay hidden? What if someone else would come for them? Someone who was willing to take the risk, to embrace the power and unlock the door that Mark had just closed? The stranger seemed to read his thoughts. "You've done what needed to be done, but don't think for a second that the world is safe. There will always be those who seek this power." Mark nodded, his eyes heavy with the burden of what he had learned. He didn't have the answers. He didn't have control over what might happen in the future, but for now, he had stopped the cycle from repeating. The Mustang stood beside him, its eyes still locked on him, and Mark knew the creature understood the gravity of the moment. There was no going back now. The secrets had been buried again. The door had been closed, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Mark felt the weight of his decision sink in as the last vestiges of the vortex vanished into thin air. The room was still, the oppressive energy fading into an eerie calm. The book, now closed, seemed to settle in its place on the pedestal, its silent presence heavy with the knowledge it contained. The Mustang, still standing beside him, appeared calm, its eyes no longer filled with the urgency that had driven them both to this moment. But as Mark stood there, the gravity of what he had just done began to weigh more heavily on him. The vortex was gone, the power contained. for now. But was it enough? Had he done the right thing? He turned to the stranger, who had remained silent throughout the process, watching Mark with a mixture of relief and concern. The man's face was still, his eyes darkened with knowledge that Mark could only begin to comprehend. He had warned Mark about the dangers, about the destructive potential of the ancient power they had unearthed. And yet, Mark could sense that there was more to the story than the stranger had revealed. "Is it really over?" Mark asked, his voice hoarse. His throat felt dry, as though he had just emerged from a long, dark tunnel. The stranger met his gaze, his expression somber. "For now, yes," he replied, his voice measured. "But the truth is, Mark, we never truly close these doors. We can only delay what will inevitably come. The knowledge you've uncovered, it's been buried for a reason." Mark nodded slowly, the weight of the stranger's words sinking in. He had made his choice. He had turned away from the power that the book offered, the ancient knowledge that could have changed everything, but he couldn't shake the feeling that by doing so, he had merely postponed something far greater. "I did what I had to," Mark said, more to reassure himself than anyone else. "I couldn't let it take control. I couldn't risk it." The stranger seemed to consider this for a moment before he spoke again, his voice soft but laced with an undeniable truth. "You've made a difficult decision, Mark, and while you may have stopped the immediate danger, you've only delayed the inevitable. The world isn't ready for the power you've uncovered, but it doesn't mean it won't come back for it. There will always be others who seek it." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard the warning, understood the implications, but the weight of it was heavier now. The secrets, the power, the knowledge, it was too much to remain hidden forever. It would find a way to escape. The world would eventually need to know what had been buried beneath the earth. And when that time came, would anyone be able to stop it? "We can't keep it buried forever," Mark whispered. "Someone will always find it." The stranger nodded gravely. "Yes, there will always be those who seek what has been hidden, those who believe they can control it. That is the curse of knowledge, Mark. Those who seek it will be forever drawn to its power, even if they know the consequences." Mark's thoughts spiraled. He had been so focused on protecting the world from this dark secret, but now he understood the true weight of what he had done. The truth had been sealed away, but it wasn't gone. It was only waiting for the next person, the next group of people to find it. The Mustang stepped forward, its head lowering as if sensing Mark's turmoil. Mark reached out to touch the horse's mane, the smoothness of its coat grounding him in the moment. The Mustang had always been there, guiding him, leading him down this path. It had been a protector, a keeper of the secret. But now Mark wondered if the creature's role was something much deeper, something tied to the very power he had just sealed away. "The Mustang," Mark murmured, his mind working through the haze of his thoughts. "It knew. It was waiting for me to make this decision, wasn't it?" The stranger gave a faint nod. "The Mustang is more than just a guide, Mark. It is connected to the very force you have uncovered. It has been here for centuries, ensuring that the secret stays hidden, that the cycle does not repeat. It is bound to this place, just as the knowledge you've uncovered is bound to it. The horse has always known the path, even when you didn't." Mark turned to the Mustang, his eyes meeting its dark, knowing gaze. There was so much more to this creature than he had ever imagined. The horse wasn't just a guide, it was part of something much larger, a force, a presence that had been watching over this secret for generations. "What happens now?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The stranger stepped back, as if giving Mark space to come to terms with the enormity of what had transpired. "Now, Mark, you live with the consequences of your choice. You will leave this place, but you will carry the knowledge with you, and one day it will call to you again." Mark didn't know how to respond. He didn't know how to process what the stranger had said. The power had been contained, but it wasn't gone. It wasn't over. He knew deep in his gut that this was only the beginning. The world had been changed forever, and he would never be able to forget what he had uncovered. But there was one thing that stood out above all else: the choice he had made. He had chosen restraint, chosen to walk away from the temptation of the power that could have reshaped the world. He had chosen not to let the knowledge consume him. And in that choice, perhaps he had found a semblance of peace. Mark turned to leave, the Mustang following closely behind him, its steps steady and sure. The stranger didn't stop him. He didn't try to change his mind. He only watched as Mark walked away, understanding the weight of the journey he had just completed. As Mark stepped back into the woods, he felt a strange sense of finality. The forest was quiet, the path before him unmarked, and yet he knew that his journey was far from over. The world would change, whether he wanted it to or not. The knowledge he had uncovered would find its way back to the surface, but for now, he had made his choice, and that had to be enough. Mark walked through the dense forest, the air cool and crisp against his skin. The trees above him stretched tall and silent, as if they had been standing there for centuries, watching the unfolding of history. His steps were measured, each one heavier than the last. The Mustang walked beside him, its dark coat blending into the shadows of the trees, its presence like a constant reminder of the choice he had made and the burden he would carry. As he walked deeper into the woods, Mark felt a strange sensation in his chest, a pull, a tugging at his conscience. It was the knowledge, the power, still lingering within him, despite his decision to leave it behind. The feeling was subtle but persistent, as if the secret he had uncovered had left a mark on him, an indelible imprint that could never be erased. He had sealed the power away for now. He had made the right choice, hadn't he? He had stopped the vortex from swallowing everything, prevented the ancient force from ripping open the fabric of reality itself. But deep down, Mark knew that the decision wasn't as simple as he had hoped. The truth had been locked away for a reason, and no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, the truth was not something that stayed buried forever. His thoughts drifted back to the stranger, the man who had guided him through the final steps of his journey. The stranger's words echoed in Mark's mind, more urgent now than ever. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. Someone else will come for it. Someone who thinks they can control it. Mark couldn't help but wonder if the stranger was right. Had he truly done enough? Or had he merely delayed the inevitable? The Mustang paused, its head turning toward Mark, its dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that seemed to pierce through him. For a moment, it felt as though the horse was trying to communicate something, urging Mark to remember something he had yet to realize. "Is it over?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling with uncertainty. The horse's gaze did not waver. Mark knew it could not speak, but he could feel the weight of its presence, the way it seemed to urge him forward. And just like that, it hit him. The realization struck with the force of a lightning bolt. He hadn't sealed away the knowledge. He hadn't stopped the power. He had only postponed it. The secret of the ancient civilization, the knowledge they had tried to bury, was not something that could be hidden away forever. The world would eventually find it again. There would always be those who sought power, those who believed they could control it. And when they did, they would come for him. They would come for the secrets he had uncovered. Mark's breath caught in his throat as the full weight of the truth settled over him. He wasn't the end of the journey. He was only the beginning. The Mustang snorted softly, its tail flicking as though it understood Mark's realization. It stepped forward, its hooves sinking into the soft earth, leading Mark toward the clearing ahead. Mark followed, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him with each step. As they reached the clearing, Mark saw something in the distance, a figure. It stood still in the shadow of the trees, watching him. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the towering trunks of the forest. But as he drew closer, the figure became clearer. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, standing with his arms crossed, his face obscured by a hood. Mark's heart raced, his instincts screaming at him to stop, to turn around and leave, but he couldn't. The man's presence was too commanding, too familiar. It was as if he had been waiting for Mark. The Mustang slowed its pace as Mark approached, and when he reached the figure, the man finally spoke. "You've made your choice, Mark." The voice was deep, calm, but with an edge of something darker beneath the surface. "But you can't stop what's coming. The knowledge you've unlocked will be sought after. It's only a matter of time." Mark's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" The man's hood shifted slightly as he tilted his head. "That doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you've played your part, but the world isn't done with you, and neither is the secret." Mark took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the iron key that he had tucked into his coat pocket. The same key that had unlocked the power, the same key that had led him here. "You're not alone in this, Mark," the man continued, his tone softer now, but with a hint of something menacing lurking just beneath. "There are others who understand the stakes, others who see the power for what it truly is." "What do you want from me?" Mark asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "Why are you here?" The man took a step forward, his presence more imposing now, his eyes gleaming beneath the shadow of his hood. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Mark. I'm here to offer you a choice, a real choice." Mark's mind raced. He didn't know what to think, what to believe. Everything was spiraling out of control. The truth, the power, was it all just a game? Was it just one big manipulation? "You've made the right choice for now," the man said, as if reading Mark's thoughts. "But the world is changing. The knowledge you've uncovered, it won't stay hidden for long. The gates will open again, and when they do, there will be no stopping what comes through." Mark swallowed hard, his mind a swirl of confusion. "What do you want me to do?" The man's gaze softened, his voice almost soothing now. "What I want, Mark, is simple. I want you to join us, help us control what's coming." Mark's chest tightened. "Control it? You want to control it?" The man nodded. "Yes. The knowledge is too dangerous to be left to chance. We can make sure it's used for the right reasons, for the greater good." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. And if I refuse? The man's lips curled into a small smile, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then the world will continue on its path toward destruction. But you've already made the choice once before. You will make it again. Mark stepped back, his mind a blur of conflicting thoughts. The man's offer sounded like a solution, a way to harness the power, to control the knowledge. But the more Mark thought about it, the more he realized that the offer was a trap. There was no such thing as controlling power like that. There was no such thing as keeping it safe. The moment he accepted, he would become part of the cycle, part of the problem. I won't help you, Mark said, his voice steady, though his heart raced in his chest. I made my choice. I'm not part of your game. The man's smile faded and his gaze turned cold. We'll see about that. With a final cryptic look, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. Mark stood there, his heart still pounding, the weight of the decision heavier than ever. The Mustang stood beside him, its gaze fixed on the darkened path ahead. Mark didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure. The truth was never truly buried. It was always waiting for the right moment to rise again. And when it did, Mark would be ready. Mark stood in the clearing, his mind racing as he processed everything that had just transpired. The man, the stranger, had left him with a choice, but it wasn't a choice at all. It was an ultimatum, a dangerous one that forced him to decide the future of the knowledge he had uncovered, to control it or to fight against it. The Mustang stood motionless beside him, its dark eyes unblinking, as if it had known this moment would come. Mark glanced at the horse, his chest tightening with uncertainty. The creature had always been his guide, his protector. It had led him to the truth, to the door that should never have been opened. But now that it was open, Mark realized the true depth of the power he had unleashed. He couldn't turn back. He couldn't undo what he had done. But what now? What was his next move? He thought about the stranger's offer, the promise of control, of using the knowledge for a greater good. But the more Mark considered it, the more he realized that there was no such thing as control over something this dangerous. The moment you believed you had mastered it, it would consume you. It had always been that way. The weight of the key in his pocket reminded him of the moment he had first unlocked the secrets of the past. It had felt like fate then. Now it felt like a burden he could never shake. You're not part of their game, Mark whispered to the Mustang, his voice trembling slightly. The horse's gaze seemed to soften, a silent affirmation of his thoughts. I can't play by their rules, not again. Mark turned and started walking, the path ahead unclear, shrouded in the shadow of the forest. The Mustang followed, its hooves silent on the ground, keeping pace with Mark's every step. For the first time, the air around him felt oddly quiet, as if the world itself was waiting for something. Mark couldn't tell if it was the calm before the storm, or if the world had simply stopped moving, holding its breath. He had made his decision. He wasn't going to be a part of this any longer. The knowledge of the ancient civilization, the power that lay hidden for centuries. It wasn't something to be controlled. It wasn't something to be used. It was something that had to be buried once again. Mark's thoughts drifted back to the stranger's words. The world isn't done with you. He had tried to warn Mark, but in doing so, had only revealed what Mark had already known. The world had always been hungry for power, for control, and there would always be someone who would stop at nothing to seize it. But the decision had already been made. He wasn't going to be the one to unleash it again. He couldn't. The truth, the darkness of the secret, it was too dangerous to be handled. Mark had to stop it, once and for all. As he walked through the trees, the thought of the book and the key gnawed at him. He couldn't just leave it there. He couldn't risk someone else finding it. He knew that the moment he turned his back on it, the world would come looking. It was only a matter of time. Then it hit him. The answer was simple, but it was the hardest choice he could make. He had to destroy it. The key, the book, the power, it all had to go. He would burn it, reduce it to nothing. The secret would be lost forever, erased from the world for good. But where? Where could he do this? Where could he ensure it was truly gone? The Mustang seemed to understand, its head tilting slightly as if reading his thoughts. Mark stopped in his tracks, the realization dawning on him. The place, the well, the place where it had all started. It was the only place where the secret could be buried properly, where it couldn't resurface, no matter how much time passed. "I have to go back," Mark said aloud, his voice steadier now. The decision was clear. The answer had been in front of him all along. If he wanted to ensure that the power would never return, he had to finish what he had started. The Mustang walked ahead of him as though it already knew the path, leading Mark through the forest without hesitation. Mark followed closely, his mind now fixed on the journey ahead. The well, the key, the book. He had to destroy them. No one else could ever find them again. No one could ever use the power for their own purposes. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the trees growing denser, the shadows deeper. The air grew cooler, the feeling of unease returning. It was as if the forest itself was resisting him, fighting against his decision. But Mark pushed forward. He had no other choice. As they reached the edge of the clearing where the well stood, Mark could see the faint outline of the stone structure in the distance. It was just as he had left it, old, weathered, and still as haunting as it had been the first time he laid eyes on it. He stopped just short of the well, staring at it as if waiting for something to change. The ground beneath him felt different now, as though the very earth was aware of the weight of what was about to happen. Mark took a deep breath and reached into his pocket, pulling out the small metal box with the key inside. The same key that had unlocked the secret. The same key that had almost destroyed everything. He stared at it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in his hand. This had been his first step into this nightmare, and now it would be his last. He stepped forward, walking slowly toward the well. The Mustang followed, standing by his side as he reached the edge. The earth beneath the well was cracked, the stone worn with age, but it still held an undeniable presence. Mark knew what he had to do. He opened the metal box and pulled out the key, the ancient symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. Without hesitation, he threw the key into the well, watching it disappear into the dark depths. He had to let it go. He had to bury it. But that wasn't enough. He had to make sure the knowledge was destroyed, the secrets erased forever. Mark turned and looked at the Mustang, who stood silently by his side. It's time. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the book, the ancient leather cover still soft to the touch. It had been silent for so long, but it felt alive in his hands. The weight of it, The knowledge inside was overwhelming. Mark stepped back from the well and took the book in both hands. He held it above his head for a moment, staring at the cover. It was a simple thing, really, but the power inside of it was unimaginable. With one final, forceful motion, Mark threw the book into the well. It landed with a soft thud, and for a moment there was silence. Then a deep, resonant hum filled the air, and the ground beneath Mark's feet trembled. The well began to glow, the light from within growing brighter, more intense. Mark stepped back, his heart racing. It was as if the well had awakened once again, ready to consume what had been thrown into it. But Mark didn't move. He stood there, waiting. The light from the well flickered, then suddenly vanished, leaving behind an eerie calm. The air felt heavier than before, but it wasn't oppressive. It was final. Mark knew then that it was over. The knowledge, the power, it was gone. The well had taken it back, where it would remain buried forever. He turned to the Mustang, which stood by his side, watching him with an unblinking gaze. Mark didn't know what to say. He didn't need to. The journey had come to an end, for now at least. The secret is buried. The knowledge is lost. But the world will always hunger for what has been hidden. Mark's journey may be over, but the cycle continues. Stay tuned for the next chapter in the saga.